Support for this program is provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziggler Foundation of Jennings. The Ziggler Museum is a cultural center for Southwest Louisiana, featuring European and American art and wildlife dioramas. Additional support provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
Hi everyone, right now on the state we're in. Gunfire shatters a quiet morning and leaves a Louisiana politician fighting for his life. Could the tragedy impact a rocky special session? A deadly labor dispute rooted in racism engulfed Thibodaux in 1887. 130 years later, the move underway to say we're sorry and try and right the wrong.
Without a higher gas tax, the state will need help to fix its troubled roads. I'm Kelly Spires.
And I'm Andre Morrow. More on those big stories, but first, news making headlines across Louisiana. LSU baseball fans like to call Omaha, Nebraska their second home, and why not? LSU's making its 18th trip to Omaha, and Tiger Nation will show up in huge numbers, dwarfing the fans traveling from other schools.
Woolley, right of second base.
They punched their ticket to the series with a stirring super regional sweep of Mississippi State. Their next quest, win a 7th national baseball championship. They begin that challenge against Florida State tomorrow night. More than a year after talk swelled that Louisiana was on the cusp of some big road improvement projects, we're still waiting for the first shovel of dirt to turn. Have we taken a step backwards? In a moment, we hear directly from the man in charge of the state's roads, highways, and bridges. A war few wanted, and one void of the reverence reserved for other wars, may be gaining new respect. We go on the front lines of how Louisiana and LPB view Vietnam. When time ran out on the legislature forcing yet another unpopular special session, cynics had a field day. You know, Louisiana politics as usual, many said. A lot of talk, not so much substance. As lawmakers got down to business, though, word of a tragedy hit close to home. Would it play a role in what happened next?
The House come to order, members. Please vote your machines.
When the gavel sounded, you could sense it.
We gather under some somber conditions.
The pall hanging over the state capitol chambers after an unthinkable tragedy.
God, thank you for the opportunity to serve the people of Louisiana. May we keep the people outside this building at the forefront of our minds, our actions, and our thoughts, because what we do here will affect many of the lives that we have sworn to protect.
Ruston Republican Rob Shadowin's prayer addressed the 4.5 million who call Louisiana home, but it also spoke directly to fallen comrade Steve Scalise, the New Orleans Republican fighting for his life in a Washington hospital. Just hours earlier, Scalise and a group played pitch and catch at an area ballpark, practice for an annual charity baseball game. Then it all stopped. This cell phone video shows the chaos when a crazed 66-year-old President Trump hater went to the ballpark and opened fire. He ran off 71 shots, inflicting hate and fear and injury and damage to those he hit. Scalise got the worst of it. The single rifle shot struck his hip, fracturing bones, injuring internal organs, and causing severe bleeding. He's undergone several operations as he battles to become stable.
You just don't know the sensitivities that folks have with the work that we do. And, you know, you hate to think that you would have to continue to look over your shoulder that carefully. It hit a little close to home with one of our members, the chairman of my Appropriations Committee, who was the author of the budget bill on the House side, Cameron Henry. His brother Charles works for Scalise's organization, and Cameron, of course, Wednesday morning when all this was happening, was due to present the budget bill with us on the floor, and left to fly with the family up to Washington.
Everybody was just a little stunned as news kept trickling in. It was, it was pretty somber. But also, I think we were hearing pretty decent reports that things were, that he was improving. It seems that over the days that's continued to be a difficult recovery, but certainly it was a more somber atmosphere.
Still, the business at hand for legislators was to find a way to present a balanced budget. And Friday, senators gave the final passage of the bill, which will now go to the governor's desk. The new budget will keep most state agencies free from cuts, and TOPS will be fully funded. A proposed tax hike on a gallon of gas had the support from many business groups. It was said to be the answer to help rebuild our aging, inadequate roads and bridges. But lawmakers said no to the chance at a 17 cents a gallon tax increase, even though it had been decades since even a cent was raised on the tax. So what now? Kelly Spire sat down with the transportation chief, Shawn Wilson, to see if we're nearing the end of the road without that money.
I'd like to start by talking about the state of roads in Louisiana. You hear around the Capitol a lot this number that $13.1 billion is the amount of backlog we have for our maintenance needs for infrastructure.
That's correct, and that's for the roads and bridges only. Keep in mind that the department has 16,000 miles of road, but we also have 32 ports, 62 airports. We've got waterways that we're responsible for, and over 3,000 miles of railroad tracks that we coordinate and work with the private sector on. When I became secretary, the backlog was $12.4 billion. After my first year as secretary, spending over $1 billion on our roads, that figure jumped up to $13.1 billion. That simply means we're not spending enough to maintain status quo and have our system in a state of good repair.
So there was an opportunity for new funding up in the legislature this year, the gas tax, to raise it by 17 cents. The proposal changed a little bit here and there, but ultimately it didn't come up for a vote in either chamber.
The 17 cents is a real figure. At the very minimum, that restores the value of the gas tax, and that was the governor's commitment, was at least restore the value of the gas tax, because the 16 cents you pay, you should get 16 cents of value out of it. At the end of the day, the task force that the governor created was a bipartisan, statewide group, multimodal in nature. We took the bold step of making a recommendation of how to pay for this and not just rework the list. We can always talk about projects. The number we came up with was $700 million. That's something that is a pretty daunting task just as a gas tax. But around the country, other states are using other funds to pay for that. It's not all just a gas tax. In Texas, they're using general fund money to go to transportation. Here in Louisiana, we're debating at times taking transportation money to go to the general fund. So that's a little backwards in some regards. And so for us, we said 700 is the real figure. That is what will get us the better preservation and the better system we have, but it'll also build the big projects like a new bridge in Baton Rouge, I-49 South, Barksdale Air Force Base entrance.
One of the criticisms that we heard around the Capitol regarding the gas tax is that DOTD has money and it's just not spending it on roads.
There were a couple of bills that were debated in addition to the revenue package. Keep in mind that when people say you're not spending the money you have today on roads, that's something of the past. This administration on day one said, let's take the administrative authority we have and not send money to Louisiana State Police. Very good organization, very necessary. We were spending almost $70 million a year. Over the life of the Transportation Trust Fund, we've spent over $500 million to state police for traffic safety. And then when you look at the natural disasters that we have here in the state of Louisiana, we had a 500-year flood and a 1,000-year flood, and I have no other fund to be able to support that. We only have about $3 million in our emergency fund, so everything else is going to take away from projects. I will tell the public, we're not doing anything different than any other state. The reality is other states have invested more to keep up with the cost of doing business.
Some of the items in this bill you've said that you were okay with, and some of them you weren't. As
Secretary of the Department, I am very transparent and very open about wanting to be collaborative and work with people, and if we make mistakes, we'll tell you that and we'll fix them. By the same token, I think we have to follow the law in terms of what the law does. And so the law lays out a priority process for selecting projects. A lot of legislators now with term limits may not understand the history of what happened there. Prior to this process, the governor and the leadership of the House and Senate, they picked and chose projects based on the relationships that they had to curry favor for other bigger issues perhaps. So we now have a system in place that we travel the state, we make engineering, data-driven decisions on needs that elected officials, legislators, citizens can offer input, and we prioritize them all based on the amount of money we have. And so in the bill that Representative Abramson filed, he wanted to add some more transparency in decision making in terms of where locals fit. Who makes the decisions on projects? How do they fit with local government? And how do we make changes in that program? And when do we tell the public? And so we support those elements. There was one issue in the bill that would have stripped the opportunity to have a public hearing and then make recommendations, but it would have allowed legislators to change projects at the very end of the process. That's a real concern in terms of making professional, data-driven decisions, particularly when it comes to safety. That's not something that I take very lightly or that the state should take very lightly. And so when we choose a project, that project needs to advance because it is a need that is so great. And we've got so many more needs, and I think the frustration is that the needs far outweigh the revenue that we have today.
Let's end on a high note.
Yes.
I hear that there's a new project that's about to be announced on I-10.
Absolutely. There was something called the Fast Lane competition under the previous administration, President Obama's administration. As a result of that, we've got a $183 million project on I-10 from I-49 all the way to the Chaffalay Basin. We're advancing the Washington Terrace Street off-ramp. We're going to let that project in December or January of 18. And we've got another project that we just opened bids on today, and it's to widen Highland to 73 on I-10. So we're going to now have 3 lanes from that Blue Bayou intersection all the way down to Ascension. That's an example of what we can do when we get revenue and we get dollars. I don't want the public to look at that and say, see, they have money. That's one-time money that is only going to be spent on that project. So when it's over unless there's new revenue.
Gotcha. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Secretary Wilson.
All right, thank you.
Kelly, thank you for that. A proposal to up the gas tax here is not likely to come up again until 2021. The story of a mass murder in Lafourche Parish that occurred over 130 years ago had been relegated to the past. That is until John DeSantis, a reporter with a criminal justice background, heard about the tragedy and wanted to know more. In the post-Civil War South, the economy was shattered as blacks were no longer slaves and plantation owners now had to pay for labor. But wages were low, prices were high, and field workers were often forced to accept plantation scrip for pay. Scrip was redeemable only at company stores and often left the worker unable to get out of debt. In 1887, a group known as the Knights of Labor organized a strike against plantations in several South Louisiana parishes. Their demands included that wages increase to $1.25 a day in actual currency. The Planters Association ignored the demands, and the state militia was sent to Lafourche Parish to evict strikers from plantation housing.
There were thousands of workers who were evicted. They made their way to Thibodaux. Thibodaux became like a refugee center. They were all over. There were families that took other people in, and the idea was that it would be a safe place for them to be during the course of the strike. The residents in town, the white residents in town, were terribly afraid. You had demonstrations going on in the streets.
Tensions were high, the state militia was gone, and the community decided that they needed to protect themselves.
A vigilance committee of 30 people was chosen. Judge Taylor Beatty issued a writ of martial law. The entrances into and out of Thibodaux were closed off, and you had sentries, armed sentries, at these entrances and exits to town. Before dawn on the morning of November 23rd, which was a Wednesday, there were 2 volunteer sentries, and they were shot, each within about 5 minutes of the other. What happened at that point was there were armed groups of men. They went from house to house. They pulled people out of houses. The shooting went on for 2 to 2.5 hours.
One of those pulled from his home, shot and left for dead, was former slave and Union Army veteran Jack Conrad.
He was a slave here in Lafourche Parish. He joined the Union Army in 1862. He was at Port Hudson. He was at various places where his unit, the 75th U.S. Colored Infantry, had gone. And when the war was over, Jack Conrad came back to Lafourche Parish. In the Jack Conrad papers in the National Archives, Jack, in his own words, tells how people banged at the door. There were 50 to 60 armed white men. Jack kept saying, "I have nothing to do with this strike. I am not a striker." They started shooting at him. He crawled under his house. His son Grant had tried to take shelter, and they shot him dead. And Jack saw this happen. Jack was shot 4 times. And he was pulled out from under the house by someone, and he was nursed back to health. We know this because in 1890, Congress passed a law that said if you were a Civil War veteran of the Federal Army, if you got hurt, if you couldn't work, even if your injury was after the war, they would give you a pension if you could prove where your injuries stemmed from. Jack Conrad applied for such a pension. It was referenced in his Army documents. Right now, what is going on is people are talking. People are talking about a thing that they never would have talked about before.
Only thing I've heard was that they were killed and they were buried there. That's the only, they wouldn't talk about it that much. I don't know why, but it looked like my father would talk about it because it was his grandfather, you know, and that's all I only know about it, you know. I don't know, maybe they were afraid. I think they were afraid. I think we're bringing people closer together, I really do. Well, the white people, I think they feel sorry for what happened. And the black folks, you know, well, the black folks, they you know, they're sorry, so it's sort of coming together.
It's a part of our history. It's not a pleasant part of our history, but it's part of our history. We have more in common with each other here, I think, in the community than we have that is different about us and divides us.
There is a concerted effort to locate the dead. The University of Louisiana at Lafayette has agreed to do a site survey at the place where we believe that victims are located. They have a public archaeology lab. When the science work is done, those people will be properly buried in coffins, and they will be buried in sacred ground.
The victims, if they are down there, they need to be put to rest and remembered.
I would like to see all of the churches. I would like to see the city council, parish council, all get together and, you know, and have something to commemorate these, I say, fallen individuals.
DeSantis hopes that the living can take comfort in knowing the truth of this dark past and by properly honoring those who died. For more information, visit la1887.com. The Vietnam War began in 1957, and U.S. military involvement in the war ended in August of 1973. Over 58,000 American service members died in the conflict, and more than 1,000 are still considered missing in action. Baton Rouge attorney Arthur Abercrombie's first assignment in Vietnam was with the 173rd Airborne Brigade, a parachute unit.
I started college in 1962, and back then 2 years of ROTC at LSU was mandatory. All able-bodied males had to join the ROTC for 2 years. I guess it was 1964, I started advanced ROTC and then was commissioned at the graduation in 1966. I was deferred for law school for 3 years and didn't go on active duty until 1969. At the time we went on active duty, I'd been married 2 years. We had a baby in December of '70, and then I left for Vietnam 5 months later. That was hard, you know, leaving a 5-month-old. It really was. I'll never forget getting off the airplane at Long Binh, Vietnam, which is down in the south end of the country. It had to be 110 degrees, the humidity had to be 100. And I was with a group of, you know, a large group of guys getting off this airplane. Everybody was complaining, and we were walking from the plane to the terminal, listening to the complaints about the heat and humidity, and I can remember saying to myself, just like South Louisiana in the summertime. My first assignment in Vietnam was with the 173rd Airborne Brigade, a parachute unit. I went to LZ English, which is the headquarters of the 173rd Airborne Brigade, and was met by some people, assigned a rifle and a pistol, ammo, and a little place to live called a hooch. My job was to practice law, but I also had a force protection aspect of the job where we had to man a certain part of the perimeter, you know, to make sure things were safe. That part of the job was typically at night. One night, about 2-3 weeks after I'd been there, the Viet Cong snuck through the wire and somehow ignited a gasoline balloon. The balloon was filled with gas, and we used that for our helicopters. And they ignited the thing, and then after they ignited it, and it went up in the air, the sappers, what we called them, came through the wire and started firing. And this was right outside of my little hooch. The daytime work was typically practicing law out of a little small office there on the landing zone where we represented people who had been accused of anything from war crimes to minor offenses. About half of our little 6-man office were assigned to prosecute and the other half to defend, and then we would switch over from time to time, and a military judge would fly in from Saigon to try our cases. We had 6 lawyers and the brigade was 5,000 men. We were pretty busy. When we moved over to Pleiku in the Central Highlands, we were in the middle of the spring offensive of 1972 by then, and I actually commanded a third of the perimeter of our base at Pleiku. I came home in the spring, almost summer of '72, and we had beat them back so bad that if we'd maintained a small force there, I think the status quo would have been enforced and South Vietnam would be a much more vibrant economy today. But most of our troops were out of there by December of that year. It was 3 years later, in April of '75, when the North Vietnamese poured over the border and in several days took over South Vietnam. I'm still not over that. You know, we lost 68,000 people over there. Looking back on it, for nothing. But I really believe that Khrushchev wanted to take over the world with communism. And I think he was testing us in Vietnam. I don't think we were wrong in starting what we started. I think we just didn't finish it. And it was not the military's fault. We didn't lose a major battle over there. It was the politicians. I totally believed in the cause, and quite frankly, still do.
In support of this fall's groundbreaking new series, The Vietnam War from Ken Burns, LPB is undertaking an initiative called The Vietnam War Louisiana Remembers. We will be scheduling preview screenings around the state and will be recording oral history interviews and encouraging viewers to record and upload their own Vietnam War remembrances. For more information, check out the webpage lpb.org/Vietnam. And that's our show for this week. Remember, you can watch LPB On Demand on your phone or tablet with our LPB Anywhere app. The download is free from your app store. You can catch LPB news and public affairs shows, as well as other Louisiana programs that you've come to enjoy over the years. And please like us on Facebook as well. For everyone at Louisiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Andre Morrow. Thanks for watching. Until next time, that's the state we're in.
We'd like to hear from you. Write Louisiana, the state we're in. 7733 Perkins Road in Baton Rouge. Call toll-free 1-800-272-8161. Email LPB. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter. And visit our website at lpb.org to view your favorite stories again. This and other editions are available on home video. Support for this program is provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziggler Foundation of Jennings. The Ziggler Museum is a cultural center for Southwest Louisiana, featuring European and American art and wildlife dioramas. Additional support provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.